Oh, hello everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the strategic conversation on No Time to Waste, building resilient urban communities and cities through locally led climate adaptation. My name is Kaustuv Bandyopadhyay, and I will be co-moderating today's conversation along with Ms. Sheila Patel, who is the Executive Director at Spark, Mumbai. Friends, this is the 20th conversation organized by Priya as part of its 40th anniversary celebration. This particular conversation is being organized in partnership with Brewcom, Building Resilient Urban Communities, which is a research consortium of planning and architecture institutions and civil society organizations. And in the recent past, Brewcom and Priya have been organizing a series of discussions in partnership with various academic institutions focusing on building resilient community. Friends, we are extremely proud of this partnership and the relationship that we have been able to build over the past years. We have an outstanding list of speakers and discussions, and we are very much eager to hear their thoughts. Let me first invite my colleague, Ms. Nikita Rakhiani, to take us through a short presentations depicting Priya's 40 years of journey.
Thank you, Kaustuv sir, and welcome everyone. Priya 40 has been an exciting journey, a journey about sustaining an independent, forward-looking, and energetic civil society organization in an otherwise rapidly disruptive and uncertain world. We've always considered ourselves as educators and facilitators, supporting individuals, organizations, and grassroots initiatives to learn, change, grow, sustain themselves. And such support is not and has never been about financial support. It is the support in form of information sharing, in the form of ideas, in the form of linkage building, support through mediation expertise, and even emotional support. Priya's theory of change follows something unique in the development sector, which is acting as a bridge between supply and demand sides of any issue or theme we invest in. We engage with as many stakeholders as possible to put in place answers which are long-lasting and effective, rather than an artificial short-term fix. We work with and not for the marginalized, the youth, the middle class, and governmental agencies at various levels. From the days of newsletters and printed journals, we moved on to use of modern technology through our website and social media handles to influence an ever-growing group of people. We can only present a slice of the work we've done over 40 years. Priya and its name Participatory Research in Asia owes its birth to the International Participatory Research Network as the main node to expand the nascent field of participatory research in the Asian subcontinent. Priya was initially primarily concerned with building an inclusive knowledge base along with building the capacities to use participatory research in India and beyond. The guiding principle for this period of Priya's history was promoting the right to learn, that is, making the process of learning available to everybody irrespective of societal divisions. By the 1990s, Priya had established its training for trainers course to impart its participatory learning methodologies to grassroots activists, government trainers, and development professionals from various fields. Participatory training methodology promoting the right to know is used to develop participatory assessment for organization development, evaluation of civil society organizations, and participatory monitoring of development programs. Soon, this methodology included a specific focus on experiential understanding of gender in everyday life. With a history of promoting and developing capacities in participatory practices, Priya took upon itself the task of strengthening the newly created institution of local self-governance. The right to information for accountability and monitoring and demanding public services became essential. In 2004, Priya for the first time spoke of people's participation in urban townships, voicing the relevance of participatory planning in urban centers as much as in rural areas. Stress on urban governance led to several research studies, such as analyzing the financial and functional competencies of urban local bodies as institutions of governance. The new millennium also saw Priya sharpen its focus on gender through work on gender mainstreaming in institutions and preventing sexual harassment at the workplace. In the past decade, Priya has deliberately focused on understanding the complexities of participation in a socially fragmented society and promoting the right to participation for all sections, especially for young people and adolescents. What have been the results of our work as a knowledge institution emphasizing learning and use of knowledge as a vehicle for change? Going beyond the numbers you see on screen, the impact of our work is found in removing obstacles, valuing knowledge, amplifying voices, and making democracy work for all. The ongoing pandemic has exposed the governance, planning, and participation deficits in India and around the world. And through these conversations, we're trying to refresh relationships. It's a reminder for history of struggles, a reaffirmation that participation still matters, and strengthening the movement to build a knowledge democracy to help reimagine our world for tomorrow. Thank you very much, Kostav sir. Would request you to take it over from here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nikita. And thank you once again to all of you for joining today's discussion. Friends, the recently concluded COP26 and its outcomes provide a extremely relevant background and context for today's discussion. For more than 2 decades, Priya has been working towards sustainable urban development and inclusive urban governance, keeping citizen engagement at the center. We have remained faithful to our core values of working with the marginalized and vulnerable urban poor and enabling their voices in the city planning process. Climate change is a reality, and its impact is being felt every day by everyone. However, it has also exacerbated the already existing vulnerabilities of the urban poor, mostly residing in often hazardous, untenable, and overcrowded informal settlements. It is in this context we are having today's conversation, primarily to inform us so that we can take a relook and re-strategize Priya's work on sustainable urban future. We'd like to learn from your decades of practices in building resilient communities and cities. So for this, we want to focus on a couple of questions for today's conversation. One of the questions that we are going to explore today is that what are the good practices adopted by the cities and communities to promote locally led climate adaptation? Second question, that what strategies should be adopted for promoting local knowledge solutions through active ownership of municipal authorities and communities? And what roles civil society organizations like Priya and many of us gathered today and other stakeholders play to strengthen locally led governance of cities? For these, it will be an informal conversation, mostly among our friends, but just to set the stage, we have requested Dr. Aditya Bahadur and Dr. Uma Maheshwaran Rajasekar to kick off their presentations. So without much ado, let me invite Dr. Aditya Bahadur, who is the principal researcher for Human Settlements Program at the International Institute for Environment and Development based in the UK. And then I'll invite next to Dr. Uma. So what we'll have after these 2 presentations, we'll have an open conversation. And towards the end, I would also request Ms. Sheila Patel, who is the Executive Director of SPARK, and Dr. Rajesh Tandon, who is the Founder President of Priya, to share their takeaways from all these discussions. That does not mean that Dr. Tandon and Shilaji would not participate in the conversation. Whenever they feel, coming into the discussion, please chip in and contribute to the discussion. Let me start with Aditya.
As I think, first of all, immense and heartfelt congratulations to Priya on this landmark moment of being in operation for 40 years. As someone who's worked in civil society organizations in South Asia for a long time, the place that Priya holds amongst this constellation of actors is truly, truly remarkable. The contributions Priya has made to so many different causes across the country is absolutely, it's unparalleled in many ways. Myself and some of my friends have studied a lot of the work that Priya has done as part of their PhD programs. And I can tell you globally also, Priya's work is well respected, cited very often. The models that they've developed, especially for community engagement in urban areas, are being replicated across the world. So this is all to say that I am deeply gratified and honored to have been asked to speak today. So a big thank you to Kaustubji, you and Rajesh ji and your teams for inviting me. So I think the issue of urban resilience and community resilience, particularly that you touched upon today, is of immense importance for two reasons. The first reason is that, as we all know, urbanization is the defining demographic trend of our times. Almost every paper that I read on urbanization or have written begins with that more people now live in towns and cities than in non-urban areas. And I think somewhere around 2018, for the first time in the history of the world, cities became the dominant locales in which most of the population resides. What's more is that some of the world's most vulnerable regions, be it sub-Saharan Africa or large parts of South Asia, are those that are urbanizing fastest. At the same time, along with urbanization being the defining demographic trend of our times, climate change is definitely the defining environmental shock of our times. And along with fast expansion of urban areas, we have the intensification of climate risk. Almost every city over 1 million in population is going to experience 1.5 degree temperature rise within our lifetimes, which is significant. 2/3 of all cities over 5 million are quote unquote in low-lying areas and therefore highly prone to flooding. And almost 95% of all cities in the world are located along the coast or along the river and therefore are highly exposed to the impacts of a changing climate. This apart, cities contain, especially in the global south, large numbers of vulnerable people who don't have the resources to adequately prepare for, adapt to, bounce back from different kinds of shocks and stresses. I mean, let's just look at the fact that a conservative estimate puts the number of slum dwellers in the world cities at about 1 billion, which is an average of 30% across the world. And this number is only rising. It's also apparent that of these billion people who live in slums across the world cities, 750 million earn less than $1 a day, and therefore do not have the financial safety nets on which they can rely once shocks and stresses arise, which makes the imperative for urban community resilience extremely urgent and extremely important. And there are different ways to think about how to build resilience. My contention here today is that we need at least 5 things. And Priya, I'm glad to say, and others such as Slum Dwellers International, Spark, and many others represented in this conversation today have adopted one or more of these 5 approaches to build resilience. I think the foundation of good community resilience in urban areas rests on high quality data. Now, it is crucially important that by and large, the data landscape for resilience has been dominated by top-down scientific approaches that do not communicate the full picture. Sometimes the results from these scientific approaches are not useful for decision making. They look at problems through the lens of the expert, as opposed to through the lived experience of those who are on the front lines of the battle against climate change in cities. And therefore, I think we as a community of practice need to advocate more strongly for a shift to more decentralized, disaggregated data approaches of the type the Slum Dwellers International and other organizations have been leading, where slum dwellers do structured surveys of themselves to make themselves seem become visible to policymakers and planners. So I think we need different kinds of data to come together to tell a complete picture of the impacts that climate change might be having on vulnerable communities in cities. The second prong definitely is about working quite closely with vulnerable urban communities to ensure that they have the capacities to respond to shocks and stresses coming from climate change or other sources. Now, by and large, the current landscape of community-based adaptation in cities is typified by initiatives that are incremental, piecemeal, ad hoc, unsustainable. I am, of course, caricaturing. There are some extremely good outliers out there, but as by and large, the field is that. And therefore, I think as a community of practice, we need to advocate for a shift towards quote unquote more transformational approaches for engaging with local communities. And there are 3 or 4 key pillars of transformation. Cutting across all of them is this idea of local leadership, supporting and building local institutions so they can lead decision making on adaptation, as opposed to these decisions being taken by people at a higher level. The third prong of a comprehensive approach to building urban resilience is definitely around capacity and capability development in the people who are running key urban systems: water, energy, transport, health. Across the board, investments in resilience across these core urban sectors have been dominated by infrastructural development. Something like 97.5% of all the money that the Global Environmental Facility has given to cities for dealing with environmental change has gone into the development of new infrastructure, with only a very small amount earmarked for capacity development, which is typical across different funds. And therefore, we need to ensure that we balance the sharp emphasis on building dikes and dams and new kinds of bridges and new kinds of breakwaters with an emphasis on ensuring those people that are running critical urban systems understand the impacts of climate change, can manage adaptively, can develop strategies, can deal with exigent situations as they emerge. The fourth prong of this approach is definitely planning. You can't have a discussion on urban resilience unless we talk about urban planning. And urban plans have been used across the board to enhance the resilience of the cities in different ways. By and large, they help reduce hazards, exposure, and vulnerability by influencing what is built in a city, how it is built, and where it is built. But I really feel, and I'm presume I'm opening up myself up for some challenges here, that as a community of practice, all of us who focused on building the resilience of cities have focused way too sharply on mainstreaming resilience within formal planning processes without adequately acknowledging that sometimes over half of a city is informal, lives in slums, and is beyond the writ of the master plan, the land use plan, the municipal development plan, the city development plan. And there is very little link between what exists on paper in these plans and what exists in reality in these cities. And therefore, we need to shift towards a much more meaningful engagement with the informal sector, with people living in slums and working in the informal economy, and bringing formal planning processes and informal actors closer together. And my final proposition here is that in order to enhance urban resilience, we need the right kind of financing. None of this is possible without finance. Unfortunately, at the moment, financing has been scant, kind of temporary, comes and goes, difficult to access. And by and large, it is the international climate funds that end up providing the formal financing for building resilience. And many times these are too slow moving and out of touch with the realities on the ground in the cities of developing countries. And therefore, we need to shift towards more innovative approaches of generating financing, which could include climate budgeting, where the government's own resources are spent more judiciously on activities that deliver a climate benefit, an economic benefit, and a social benefit. And methodologies for these are now proliferating. And new kinds of land value capture schemes, where governments can do certain interventions, raising the value of land, taxing the value that has been added, and then investing that in the resilience of poor urban communities. I'm also going to risk Sheilaji's ire and also put in urban resilience municipal bonds in there. I know they haven't worked well in the past, there is a history of their proceeds being invested inequitably. But I think we shouldn't give up on them yet because of the potential of raising financing through urban resilience, through municipal bonds and investing that in urban resilience. But of course, an enabling environment for that needs to be built through which we make sure that the proceeds from these are invested wisely to ensure the health, wealth, and well-being of the city's most vulnerable residents. Of course, those are some of my early propositions here. I'm very happy for people to shoot these down, and I look forward to a lively debate. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aditya. I think you have mentioned all the crucial elements that need to be considered. In our sort of background note, we talked about the governance of resilience, and I think in a way sort of demystified what does it mean. You know, data, and that too community-driven, community-owned, not necessarily only relying on the expert-generated data. And how do we link the planning and the decision-making process with the data generated by the community? So what we sort of see a rhetoric of data-driven governance, it has to be data-driven planning, data-driven decision-making, and therefore giving the communities lived experience a place, a space which can then influence the resilience planning. Two other important issues that you have talked about, the capacity building and financing. These are linked. And looking at the current sort of capacities of the cities, we need capacities across all these 5 elements. Therefore, it's not either or. They need to be supported through that. And I think in the subsequent discussion, we'll come back to that. What could be the strategies to build capacities to govern from a resilience angle? And I completely agree with the sort of observation that since the existing planning process is so exclusionary, mainstreaming resilience would not, mainstream the resilience concern of the community within the sort of, given planning structure or processes that we have. So we need to rethink how cities are planned in a more sort of inclusive manner in order to address these questions. So thank you so much for flagging all these important issues, Aditya. Let me go to Dr. Uma Maheshwaran Rajasekar, who is the chair of Urban Resilient Unit at the National Institute of Urban Affairs in NIUA. Uma, we have a kind of particular expectation from you that because you are part of a government sort of think tank, and you have been advising the government of India and various other state governments and city governments to become resilient. So what are the kind of frameworks and advices that you are providing, and the kind of support that, or the capacity support that Aditya has talked about? Please give us a broad picture, at least in the next 7-8 minutes.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Kaustubh, and thank you for having me on their 40th anniversary. I think it's been an incredible journey for them over the last 40 years. And some of the works which Aditya did talk about is widely referred, at least in India, and I've been reading some of the work which Priya has been doing for quite some time. Just to bring in an analogy, what 40 years does to an institution is it creates a lot of memory of what all not to do. And it also creates a lot of systems, processes in place, and there is a strong memory, institutional memory, which gets carried over and which helps building up scale. So just to bring in the analogy of what is happening to Indian cities, post-independence, our first 40 years were concentrated on developing these mega projects. So we had no memory of urban development till the globalization took place. And after that, in the recent 40 years or 33, 35 years, what's happening is we have been more reactive to urban development per se. Our planning rules and systems, which have been established for the 90 years, since 1901 to 1990, has always been targeted towards 1% decadal growth. And post 1990, it's not been 1%, it's pretty much been close to 10% annual growth. And over the decade, 1990, the urban population doubled in 2001. And once again, there was a 10% increase in urban population since 2001 to 2011. So pretty much our systems, our approaches towards these things were never geared towards addressing this rapid change in demography. Before I come into what are all the options which the government is doing and what this current situation is leading to is the changing demography has led to people not retaining the memory of previous risks and hazards and vulnerability and so on and so forth. And new people settling into urban systems are not really comfortable or really aware of what are the systematic approaches they need to take in place, either to safeguard themselves or to safeguard the environment around them. The second thing is we have moved away from the land use, land cover based planning approaches, even though our systems, many of the cities do follow that. We are now working with hidden systems. When you take the work of economy, when you take connectivity, either it is digital connectivity or either it is, water supply, sewage, sanitation, even electricity for that matter, which were all visible to, people living in urban areas. They were, cables going through. Even now you see some cables in some of the cities, but these systems have become hidden. But these are the systems which are actually driving the urban economy per se. So how do you make people understand or appreciate these visible, invisible systems? When you talk about water supply, much of the connection is underground, piped water supply. But many of the sewage wastewater is also underground. When people throw waste, it chogs up the drain, leading to localized flooding. But how do you make them understand there is a hidden system below the ground which functions or which takes care of their day-to-day need? And the third one is the most difficult, it is the psychology or the attitudinal change. People who are in urban areas, they are mostly transitory in nature. Even new migrants who come and play, they are not sure whether they are going to stay in that particular city or that particular place for the next 1 or 2 generations. It ends up happening that way if they get a job, if they get a livelihood, or if they are happy with the city and if they are happy with the services, then they end up staying in that particular city. But always what happens is people move to a smaller town or people move to a place where they have friends and families. But ultimately, when the job, forces them to go to another city, they end up moving to another city. So the belongingness to the city is never there. Or for them to change their attitudes, whatever they have been practicing in the rural areas, to change it drastically takes almost a generation. So if you look at many of the newborn or people who are born post 2000, they are very much conscious of their urban systems and especially the green areas and the water bodies and so on and so forth. That's because they are born into the system. They get used to, and they are also, the awareness and the sensitivity has increased over time because of the digital revolution. But if you look at somebody, who's coming new to a particular city or a town, I think this change doesn't happen immediately. It takes its own sweet time. How do you create awareness, or how do you create enabling mechanism? And in India, the biggest challenge is it's not that we don't have rules, we don't have policies in place. It is just the enforcement of the same. People are, even wearing a helmet while driving vehicles. It's very difficult to enforce. Of course, it's been done in Delhi, but if you go to towns and cities across India, it's very difficult to enforce a simple thing. It's not that people are not aware that they will fall down. It's not that people are not aware that, wearing a helmet is going to safeguard them against any accident. It is just an attitude of not, feeling comfortable with whatever that needs to be done. And of course, the final thing, whatever we do for climate, just reflecting on what Aditya did mention, if there is no strong linkage to either economy or livelihood, it becomes very difficult to convince people at large to do it. We can talk about ecosystem services, we can try to put a value, we can try to put a social value to it, but you got to create a collective, you got to create a mass to follow certain things. And that said, that's the biggest challenge. How do you put a value to social good? And until unless all people within a particular community doesn't adhere to it, the value decreases substantially. If a water body is not maintained well within a community, probably the smell or probably the waterborne diseases do affect the community at large. But at day one, when you go about saying that, people always are hesitant until unless they can see an economic benefit, immediately, or that economic benefit of the health is showcased effectively. At a government level, I mean, just jumping to some of the things, what we are doing is that there's been a larger realization on these issues. One, the government themselves cannot achieve beyond a certain level, degree, and national governments per se, their influence on cities are very limited, because cities are state subjects, and of course plannings, bylaws, building bylaws, and systems vary drastically across the Indian states. And in spite of funding coming from JNNURM or smart cities, when you actually look at the quantum of funding, they are just a drop in the bucket, especially for the bigger towns and cities. So there is a larger realization, things have to be done in a collective manner. The second biggest realization is climate change is not only the responsibility of the climate change department, which is, or the ministry, which is coming under the environment and forestry, but it is a importance of bringing various departments, multi-stakeholder, at least at the government level, to bring together. When you talk about energy, when you talk about mobility, when you talk about water, when you talk about, waste, or when you talk about real estate and development and construction and buildings, green buildings, and so on and so forth. It is not one department or one ministry which needs to take action. It is that collective action which needs to be brought about. So there is a larger realization of bringing not only multiple government agencies, it's also bringing multiple stakeholders together. And the importance of it is, is being realized, and the systems and the at least a platform to engage is evolving over time. The third biggest realization, which is also the data. So there are different data standards which have been brought in place. Data collection has substantially increased. At least we are getting a picture of, at a national level, what Indian cities are doing, which cities are progressing well, which cities are not able to progress, what is, either it is a problem at a state level, either it is a problem at a funding level, or either it is a problem at, coming up with better planning mechanism or not. Amrut is one of that. They have, the entire program is designed around collecting GIS data. Of course, that is going to increase the land value and pricing, but it is also to provide better services to these 500 towns and cities. And even smart cities have been collecting a huge amount of data. One of the ease of living index or quality of life is one of that. We are doing something called climate smart city assessment framework, where more than 96 indicators are being collected across 144 cities, not only smart cities, but also cities with 500,000 plus population. And data maturity framework is something which was again launched by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs to enable city governments to move forward in how they manage data, how do they collect data. Because IT, for what cities have done is, for them, IT is, moving away from paper-based stuff to Word and Excel. But what we are talking about is not just Word and Excel. We need, any company will have a project management application or a software running to manage the resources and people within a firm. So unfortunately, cities don't have a project management system in place. And that is something which is being developed. There are at a large scale, NUIS, National Urban Information System, and National Information Stacks All these things are being debated, they are evolving, it's coming up. So these are things which are going to really enable cities to take informed decision and timely decision. Now with IoTs and things like that emerging, I think this is going to play a key role. But evolving or developing that is also going to take time and energy, because IT, if you look at any municipal corporation across India, it'll be a civil engineer who will be the city engineer. There are very few cities in India where IT person, somebody who is a computer science engineer being a city engineer. Our IT department itself existing with the municipal corporation has been, it's very few municipal corporations across India do have an IT expert. But in the recent past, city data officers have been at least, instituted within 100 smart cities. So that is a one good step forward. Data needs to be collected, and it has to be collected in a systematic format, and it has to be collected by a person who knows what to do with the data. It's not only collecting huge amount of data, it's also creating value to it by providing, value added services and decision supports. So when, I don't know whether I have time, but there are a couple of things which I quickly wanted to highlight. Two things. One is, whatever is happening in climate and whatever initiatives, when we question whether cities are doing it, I've been working with 126 cities, and pretty much all the cities are doing something or the other. It is just that they are not being able to achieve scale. If you look at water, Chennai has been doing, the lake rejuvenation. They took up some 1,000 lakes and did it. But even 1,000 lakes is not really going to address the problem of floods or water scarcity in Chennai. If you look at waste, Indore has come up as one of the cleanliest cities in India. But the extent of waste that is being generated within the city, if you go to the peri-urban areas of Indore, you'll still find waste there. Of course, they are able to define the municipal limit, and the collection and the solid waste management process within it has been substantially improved. If anybody would have visited Indore 10 years back, they would have never imagined Indore will become one of the cleanliest cities in India. But they managed to achieve that because of the community engagement. But still, this cannot be scaled, because you cannot replicate a model through which people's attitude change over time to another city and ask them to change their attitude overnight. So irrespective of finances and other things, it's important to understand how well cities can communicate to their citizens and engage them in the process and link them to religious activities, to social activities, to events, to make sure there is some kind of a strength achieved in the process. When it comes to mobility, of course, we can take examples from Pune, but same, we can't scale it up because there are a lot of people from the IT sector felt that they are getting caught in the traffic jam, and they can save that additional 1 to 2 hours reaching the office or not. And so they came up with staggering, they came up with bicycle lanes. But if you take another city like Bhopal, you can't really do that because the IT community is a little bit more, I think, people in the IT community also can work remotely from home. Changing or staggering the work hours becomes much more easier. It's also a group of people or a group of companies, key companies, which can influence, which can act as an influencer. But if you have a diversified, highly diversified economy, bringing up those changes becomes quite difficult. If you take buildings, yes, ENS is something which has been brought about by the government. It is Econivas Samhita for cool roof and passive ventilation, which has to be brought about in the social housing schemes. Even though the protocols are there, but every city has a different geoclimatic zone. Every city and citizen has a different practice of using the buildings and spaces within the buildings. Some people use the terrace for public events or their personal events. Some people use terrace for sleeping in during hot days, during summers especially. So even though ENS is existing, how do you ensure that each and every building follows that? And after handover to a particular person, and you say that this is your house, and then you ask that person, you can't make any modifications to the exteriors or to key features within the house, becomes much more critical, And finally, it is, there are good models of new and renewable energy generation. I think Gujarat is one of the state which has come up with giving subsidies, where there is a huge promotion of rooftop solars, and also the energy companies within Gujarat. Most of them are privatized, but still they are able to buy back, the excess power generated at 3 rupees a unit. Whereas if you look at the national level, the auction for energy generation is going at 1 rupee 80 paisa, 1 rupee 90 paisa. So how do you provide that additional amount? But that is the viable model. Anything over 3 rupees or anything less than 3 rupees is really not going to attract people to sell back the power or generate, or keeping the battery pack is again going to create a lot of wastage. All the houses having batteries to store their solar power, what will happen 10 years down the line when those energy cells need to be replaced or need to be discarded, because we still don't have those large scale systems to treat, process, and also safely dispose of these panels. So good things are happening, but it's also important for us to recognize the challenge, the complexity of the urban challenge. It's not very simple. We can't have a straightforward solution. And looking forward to hearing from others in this wonderful debate. And once again, congratulations to Priya for their 40th anniversary celebration.
Thank you so much, Dr. Uma. It was fascinating to hear and so heartening to get a sense of the government's current thinking and efforts, not only by the national government, but also by state and city governments. I think the one of the challenges is how to scale it up. Where we are talking about 7,000 plus cities, 100 plus smart cities and 500 plus Amrut cities. They are only part of it. But then what happens to small and medium-sized municipalities, where in any case, the investment has been meager historically, and therefore their capacities to deal with such issues, or even envisioning a kind of better future for the cities, is constrained by the capacities and financing. But thanks for sharing all these initiatives. And one of the things that you have mentioned about that, it's ultimately at the end of the day, it's a question of how do we govern the resilience in the city, and therefore it's also the responsibility of the state and the city government and their governance and their sort of cooperative relationship. The relationship between the city and the state government becomes so important. So on that note, let me invite Mr. Tanmay Takde, who has been advising the government of Maharashtra, and his team is also working on this issue. I mean, Tanmay, we have come across this fascinating example of taking this initiative by the Maharashtra government, where they are trying to make those cities and addressing the question of carbon emission, starting with 43 cities, if I get the number correct. But the plan is to expand that to other cities as well. And I'm asking this question particularly to you, Tanmay, because in a way, both Aditya and Dr. Uma have mentioned that in India the urbanization is sort of uneven. We are sort of on an average of saying that 1/3 of the people are living in the urban areas, but nightlife technology and all other things is already showing that 50% of India lives in urban areas. But it seems that there is a kind of divide between Northeast and Southwest. The southern cities, western cities are much more urbanized and saturated as compared to eastern or northern part of the city, part of the country. Now, what happens in the south, what happens in the west, are they replicable in other part of the cities where the rate of urbanization and the pace of urbanization is not that high? So how cities and state governments can contribute to, even where you have started this work in Maharashtra, and tell us the story, how it has happened, how it occurred, that it can be done, and what are you advising to the government of Maharashtra?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. As a youth on this panel, I'm really pleased to represent the voice of just many other people like me who are passionate about this issue. And I hope that what we're doing with the government of Maharashtra actually picks up even more than it is right now. It's heartening to see everyone talking about it and actively engaging in a discussion about it. And also congratulations to Priya for completing 40 years. So in terms of what's happening with Maharashtra, a lot of my, I guess a lot of what I'll cover in this will be very anecdotal, because it's something we've been working on for the last year. So in terms of Maharashtra, we decided that it started when Mumbai committed to being a C40 city. And there's few C40 cities across India, some of them in the Northeast too. I think Kolkata is one. And I think that happened sometime late 2020. And then in the middle of the pandemic, we started working on a C40 city approved climate action plan for BMC. So that is obviously no easy task. And while kind of doing that, we realized that, okay, this is something of this scale is just as needed in any other city, even say Ichkalaranji, for example, municipal corporation, as opposed to say something like Mumbai, because we don't want to just focus on our major cities. I don't intend to say that, there's a urban rural divide or anything like that, because we have lots of rural areas around cities constantly being added to a municipal corporation. Pune, for example, just had 23 villages added to it within the last year. So that really presents a new kind of challenge before the government. So in the case of Maharashtra, it's kind of we are going forward with this, with Mumbai's climate action plan. We were doing a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, which required coordination at all levels of government, not just local, but all the way up to national. And we had to do this according to some international standards. So I guess data was one bit which we realized, okay, we need to do something about. As we were doing this, we also realized it would make sense to have a few of our million+ cities, like our prime Amrut cities like Pune, Nasik, etc., to commit to something called the Race to Zero, which essentially commits these cities to decarbonizing completely by 2050, going net zero. So in process of this, we realized just like we definitely have the political leadership for it. Our minister is really, really passionate about this issue. So we luckily have no dearth of that. So that one bit is figured out for us, which gives us a big head start. The other thing we then thought about was how do we take a commitment at this level and institutionalize? In the case of Mumbai, we realized that we had to activate not just an ecosystem, but a community who could help us achieve this goal of decarbonizing Mumbai, something we were working intently every week on. And in this, we had to engage tanks, civil society organizations, administrators who were not necessarily exactly hip to the language of climate change, because a lot of this language is highly westernized. So we had to break it down in a very local context in which not just a DMC, but even an executive engineer could understand how it affects their day-to-day. And we couldn't do this through the traditional capacity building and workshop sessions, because we wanted the municipal corporation to take active ownership of this. So we started by just doing rounds of consultations, informal chats with different people who were all trying to figure out how to make something like this happen. We knew that we wanted to do it. The administration said they wanted to do it. The how was the bigger question. So we decided to engage the community around, which meant bringing in consultants, think tanks, experts, whoever we could to the table, let it be professors from universities all around the world, and getting that discussion started. After the first few months, we realized when we finally got to making the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, we had to even explain to the administration why we need to do this and what is greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And we had to do that in Marathi. So I guess contextualizing that, it started in Mumbai primarily. At the same time, in the state, we launched this program called Maji Vasundhara Abhiyan, which means My Earth Mission. So it's, if I'm using a fancy term, it's a performance incentive program. If I'm using a layman term, it's a competition, kind of like Swachh Bharat, where we focus on climate mitigation and adaptation through the 5 elements of nature, namely air, earth, energy, water, and awareness. Essentially, what these cover is air quality monitoring, waste management, biodiversity, water conservation, rainwater harvesting, etc., renewable energy adoption, electric vehicle adoption, charging infrastructure setting up, awareness events, and all of that. We've divided into urban and rural, and one vertical of that focuses specifically on Amrit cities. So through this, we were able to mainstream the conversation on climate through the state quite a bit. So as these two things happen, they were very separate. When we started doing our race to zero commitments with the first few cities, we realized, okay, this is something that is aligning a lot with not just what we are doing, but what even say the center wants to do. There's a lot of policies, programs that say all the way from NIUA to even us at the state level to something that is very locally being done. All these align with this larger same vision of climate resilience. So we realized that we should ideally just converge all of this, institutionalize it, bring it all under one roof, and then provide some support for it on our government's end. So the way it essentially boiled down to was our race to zero commitments happened. We had 5 major cities commit to it that were tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So we could say that, okay, the political and administrative will to make something like this happen exists in not just a city like Mumbai, where our leader is from, but even in a place like Nagpur, which is completely on the other side of the state. So we realized that we could look at potentially scaling this up to all of our Amrit cities. So it involved, obviously, we realized it would be a challenge because we'd have to explain to all 43 Amrit city commissioners or chief officers, and not just that, even the engineers or the DMCs there. What is the race to zero? What is decarbonization, net zero? And I guess that was the end bit, but we had to start off by explaining how climate change was affecting them. So I guess that really kicked off when we presented the IPCC report to the state's cabinet, and the council for Maharashtra Council for Climate Change was formed. That kind of sent a general message all the way down in the state that the administration is serious about this. And at the state level, we are trying to put together something that, along with Maji Vasundhara, to support these cities. Now came the question of explaining it to them. So it started with a 2-page letter in Marathi sent by the Maji Vasundhara mission director, which explained in, I guess, very pure Marathi what race to zero is, what decarbonization is, why these cities should do that. At the same time, we worked with MPCB, which is the Maharashtra Pollution Control Board, to put out a tender, to float a tender for an agency that will help us do a greenhouse gas emissions inventory of all 43 cities. While we were providing this support through MPCB, so that the cities then don't have to worry about doing it themselves, we also aligned it a little with Maji Vasundhara. So not just this, like these are, I guess, more state-led and local initiatives that we then kind of got together for that and connected it to something like Race to Zero. But at the same large network, it's not an ecosystem. I call it a community. It's a complete community that is committed to tackling climate change. And we convened everyone, all 43 commissioners, people who work on climate change in India, think tanks, experts, anyone you can think of, all in one room in Mumbai with the minister. And we had a workshop for them that actually explained, okay, here's what the government of Maharashtra is doing. Here's what our vision is. Here's what Race to Zero and Net Zero is. And here is how we want to tie it all together. So that happened sometime before we went to COP. And following that, the conversation has picked up. And I'm proud to say that I live in a state where at this point, every level of administration, even at the gram level, knows climate change, climate mitigation and adaptation, and is in some way actively working on it. So taking the, I guess, political will, if I may use the term, and converting it to administrative will, and not just getting the commitments out, but also providing some backend support that aligns with whatever everyone is doing. I guess that essentially has resulted in the culmination of the journey at COP, where we received a lot of, I guess, positive reviews for the work we've done so far. And we hope we can continue to do that more.
Thank you, Tanmay. So inspiring. I will come back to ask a few questions to you, Tanmay. Stay with us, please. Can I invite Ashish? Ashish from Italy.
What would you like me to do? Would it help if I go ahead responding to the 3 questions that you've shared as the general areas you would
Sure,
want
Ashish.
reactions on.
That's okay.
Great.
That's okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I think I know few of you. Thank you for having me join for this conversation. Very interesting presentations at the start, and it was very nice to hear from Mr. Tanmay about the Maharashtra government's work. I represent ICLAI, Local Governments for Sustainability. We are a local governments association, and I represent the South Asia office based in Delhi. We work with local governments in the South Asia region. With cities working on climate, I think that's something that we've been doing since we were set up in India around 2005, but we've been working on climate action since around 2001, part of a program that was supported by the US government at that time called Cities for Climate Protection. And a lot of what I think Tanmay spoke about just before me is a kind of a process that we've been working with as we are engaging with cities, compiling information for the cities on getting a general sense of what is the baseline in terms of levels of emissions or climate vulnerability, using that to identify priority areas that would need attention and support on immediate basis, identify projects that require attention and that would make change in terms of what the current status is. And then based on a prioritization of these projects, what are the kind of available funding options that could be utilized for making these projects or changes a reality on ground. Most of this budgeting requirement is something that we try and identify from existing sources that cities have for improving existing conditions. And the kind of interventions as part of the climate action planning process covers areas from, I think, energy, renewable energy supply, energy conservation, to transport, to building energy efficiency, water management, or waste management. And in terms of the process generally, the way this exercise is done is we follow the approach of action planning. So this is something that is done in line with the master planning or city development planning process that's happening. However, this process informs the plans that are statutory or government supported plans that are being developed at the city level. This is something that we've been doing with cities for some time. And I think as a exercise, as a process, this has helped us bring clarity, bring understanding at the city level in terms of what needs to be done, why it needs to be done, how it can be done, and identify ways and means to get some change to happen on ground. So for us, I think as an example of good practice, I would say this process of climate action planning is a good process that we have seen cities adhere to. The process itself has changed, has improved over time based on new knowledge that we have seen inform our activities, learning from ground, and interaction as a network of cities. We are connected to cities around the world. So experiences of similar organizations around the world have helped us clean up the approach and the process. And it has changed, and it has come to a stage that we are able to, with conviction, say that this is something that can help cities react to, respond to the climate emergency and the needs of preparedness for climate change. That's one part of what I wanted to say. In terms of responding to the second question that you have asked about strategies that we can recommend to cities for mainstreaming local knowledge, I think what one could see as a very important strategy is starting and supporting conversations. Through all of our climate action methodologies, our work has included this process of initiating and continuing conversations which are open and which are consistent, that allow us to absorb experiences from the ground. And we usually talk about 3 steps in that, wherein the first step is to acknowledge, to build acknowledgement of what has been the lived experience till now. It was talked about earlier by one of the speakers. Using that to improve our information systems. So a lot of the information that we use to create the baseline of understanding how things are happening already are based on information that is collected from different organized systems of information documentation. But through this interaction, we are able to gather additional information of why certain things happen in the way they happen, and why certain things, even though logically they should happen in a certain way, do not work in that way. So that's the next thing that is aided through these conversations. And thirdly, definitely is the most important part, wherein the conversations can help us decide on decisions that need to be taken in terms of what efforts, what initiatives, what improvements need priority, and what could wait a little longer. So involvement of local communities in decision making is probably something that gets helped through this. So I think this is a very interesting strategy that one could talk about more, and I would recommend this strategy that one could look at. In terms of the role of civil societies, I think everybody knows this. It was talked in the earlier conversations as well. Our cities, municipal governments have limited capacities to engage with local communities. Has to do with the municipal staff, has to do with many other responsibilities and requirements that they have to meet on a regular basis. I think the civil society can help definitely. We do that a lot. Engage with the local community, getting clarity through organized conversations in terms of what are the concerns, what have been the experiences, what are the fears and demands of local community, that if structured, if organized better, can go a long way in helping cities, city officials, elected representatives at the city level understand what are the priority needs of the community that they are serving, and how could they best serve the same community. So I think that's all that I can say for now. If there's anything more that you would like to hear from me in terms of our work, I'd be very happy to tell more of that, sir. Thanks.
Sorry, Ashish, I was kicked out of this platform for a couple of minutes, so I just couldn't sort of hear what you said due to some internet problem. But I'm back.
No, Ashish has responded to 3 questions very well. Thank you, Ashish. Rajesh Tandon here.
Right.
So yeah, thanks. Thank you. Very precise and very clear. I especially like your point about how you are supporting the city government in order to engage the communities and have that city level conversation. That's actually essential. That's a bedrock. And even Tanmay described that in Maharashtra model exactly, that you need to involve people from administrative and community level in order to get them to agree that this is important. Only then people will start working towards it. If they don't understand that this is important or immediate or urgent, then the conversation doesn't go very far. So thank you for highlighting that. Costa.
Oh, thank you so much. Vivek? Hi, Vivek.
Thank you. So actually, I would have volunteered myself at this point, also because I have my colleague Nidhi joining the call. As you may know, Shakti has been mostly focused on mitigation issues, and we are expanding into resilience. So we have a colleague, Nidhi, who has joined the call, and she has to just leave for another meeting. So maybe I'll just ask her to speak first, and then I'll conclude towards the end. So Nidhi, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. And first of all, congratulations to Priya for completing 40 years. I think we all have grown up hearing stories of Priya and Priya's work. So thank you for that. And so I'm Nidhi. I work as a senior program manager with the climate policy team of Shakti Foundation. And as Vivek rightly said, I have major work experience on adaptation and resilience. So based on my previous work, I would like to share some good practices. Like, for example, I think all of us will agree that traditional knowledge is actually an important asset when it comes to rural community. So sorry for that. I don't have much experience of cities, but I've worked majorly on the rural community. So I can give you some examples from Punjab government. Like, for example, some farmers, they plan their paddy sowing as per the monsoon date, and then it became a huge success as they become a part of the policy where every farmer start transplanting their paddy after 10th of June. So these are some of good examples. I have a few more examples from maybe one example from Himachal Pradesh, where one district called Mandi, which implemented a climate resilient village, and then it became a huge success, which covered interventions related to agriculture, water, waste management, and finally it was taken up as a part of Himachal Pradesh Eco Village scheme. So these are some of the good initiatives which happened, which mainstream into the tradition, how the traditional knowledge is mainstream into policy planning. Of course, there are some challenges, but still it acted as a trigger point. And so what I want to convey here is when traditional knowledge is combined with local science and local information, it will do wonders. So here, as Shakti, we are also trying to build our capacities on how to, plan our climate impact modeling with the energy system modeling, so that we can train more and more local people to plan interventions as per the changing climate. So that's something which is on the cards. I don't know how it unfolds, but yeah, that is something which we look forward to work with. So over to you, Vivek.
Thanks, Nidhi. Thanks a lot. And yeah, I think just wanted to reiterate a big congratulations to Priya for the 40th year. It's a major achievement, and it's an organization that's been let's say a lighthouse for all of us who entered the urban sphere and inspired us to work in this place. So thank you very much for inviting as well. I think from our experience at Shakti, I think I might just try and break down some of these questions into a few more from the typological way of approaching what these issues are. So for us, we work across scales. And so we've not just worked, we largely work on the policy design aspects and the policy implementation aspects. But when the implementation side of it is very much grounded in cities and grounded in communities. But the community level is really challenging. It takes a lot of effort from us. It also means that we need to find a good niche where government is willing to work, where the communities are expressive enough to engage, and then everything comes together. So it's not an easy task at all. But we're trying more of it, and now we're hoping to put together a city's program itself that focuses largely on this particular challenge of ours. Some of the past examples I think that we've looked at, which has been very successful, for example, the Subnet Sustainable Urban Mobility Network that we have has been a very strong grassroots presence in many cities, ranging from Pune to Patna to further smaller cities. And what they've been able to do is, to really engage with the community, to one take take the problem and express it in a way that they understand where the issues lie. I think the translation capacity is very much important, because while you're living through your troubles, you understand, okay, what the problem is, what impacts me as a person, but you don't realize how you contribute back to policy decisions in a meaningful manner. And that's something that has really been the utility of a platform like Sumnet, where we have a lot of leaders, community level leaders, grassroots level CSOs coming together. And then, the larger theory of change is something that they understand, but they're able to translate that on the ground. I think the communities express it and engage with policymaking, because policymaking, again, does not engage with the ground at all, right? And that's the biggest challenge as well. So that's been some of the ways we've looked at it. And I've also seen, I think to an extent, we have to appreciate some attempts. I remember the Slum Networking Program was an incredible attempt that did that, received a lot of success. Even to an extent, we have to give credit to the smart cities itself, because they had the idea of an urban area-based development program or project, right? But it didn't pan out as we would have imagined it should have. It needed a lot more community level anchoring for it to really take off. So it probably didn't meet up to its potential, but definitely there was intent there. And we need to see more of those. I've seen recently the Cities program by AFD has done that in a wonderful manner, where experts have been brought in from the community, from the cities, who understand the local area, to support decision making and to translate the problems from local to where decision making really happens, to an extent a centralized level for us. To answer the second question on what strategies really work, I think I've mentioned some of them, but I'll just go over it. I think there are 5 big ones that really are important. First one being, I think, information availability. To an extent, the issue of data itself is actually an issue of information, right? How can data be turned into meaningful information about what the problem is? And how do you test a solution against that information that we have? And how do we inform meaningful actions through that, right? So data is really about how do we understand the problem and how do we understand what solutions will work. The second level, I think, is about building capacities. Just looking at the example of even Sumnet, right? The way it has been able to, some amount of expertise working with grassroots level organizations has been able to open up solutions in those cities. And that's really what we need to do more of in many cases. In several cities, even universities do that. I think, for example, how Ahmedabad is really, urban planning in Ahmedabad is such a rich topic, such a rich issue, because there is an institutional accept anchoring some of that conversation, right? And it really helps translate into policy actions. Local level stakeholder interactions, I think, without a doubt, we don't see enough of it. That's the unfortunate fact. It hasn't been institutionalized in government. That's the other problem. But that is where, to an extent, even CSOs have been able to contribute meaningfully. I think the other one is something that we've all wanted, but hasn't really happened, which is empowering local decision making also through finance. Budgeting that is devolved to a ward level, for example, is something that has been an ask for many years now. I think since the 74th, to an extent, gave a direction towards it, but it needs to be taken down to that level. It is a legislative change. Climate change is not going to wait for us to change our legislations, unfortunately, but it's something that we really need to push for even more. But that's something that still remains on the cards to be seen. And to an extent, urban planning, I think there was some commentary on how urban planning has really failed us and hasn't really worked for us at all. Which is absolutely right. There are some new ways of working on this that can be looked at. I think to an extent, the idea that which was to an extent pushed through Amrut itself, which was the local area planning, that can really help. To an extent, again, Ahmedabad has the TP scheme kind of way of thinking of things, but that's very good in a green field where you're trying to develop a new area of your city. But translating that back into how those kind of mechanisms can work on brownfields, because that's where people are located today. That's where interventions need to be made. That's where, again, I think some slum networking program kind of ideas is really what we'll need to look at.
Thanks.
Area plannings to be done. Yeah, sorry, I might be taking too much time, but I think broadly the variety of actions that we can look at, I think these are probably the 5 ones that I would really want to emphasize.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vivek. Let me invite Avinash. Avinash, I promised you that we would watch the video, but what I would suggest that instead of watching the video here, you can share the link on the chat box, and all of us can watch there. Here we want to hear your reflection on some of these questions. Not necessarily you have to answer all the questions, but the second question is very important. That what strategies might work, what strategies would work. If you could sort of focus on that, Avinash.
Perfect. Thank you. And first of all, Kaustubh and the team Priya, many congratulations. 40 years is actually shaping the history. While you're shaping the history and making us learn what to do and what not to do, what works best, I think communities have been at the core of many of your work. And given that community is at the core, for those with whom I'm not familiar with, and of course I'm familiar with many of you, CW is Asia's leading not-for-profit policy research institute, and we have been working around risk assessments primarily in this space. And in 2015, we did a global risk assessment, and now we are developing a first of its kind climate risk atlas, out of which I think I'm going to answer your second question by 2 interventions. First intervention is about data and of course, granular risk assessment. What exactly does granular risk assessments provide us? In December 2020, we did a granular assessment of hazards, primarily cyclone floods and droughts, what we call it as the hydro-made disasters. And at a district level, we could find that 75% of the Indian districts are extreme event hotspots. And with these hotspots, not to our surprise, actually, 40% of them are showcasing a swapping trend. Now, what does this swapping trend mean? Swapping trend actually provides you information that traditionally flood-prone areas are becoming drought-prone, drought-prone areas are becoming flood-prone, and some of them are witnessing simultaneously. That's where I will connect it to what Aditya suggested. Aditya suggested of localizing leadership. And localizing leadership when it comes, in fact, in the video, what I wanted to present primarily provides that information that communities have come together. They are not waiting. As Vivek rightly highlighted that climate change is not going to wait for our legislation change. Similarly, communities are not waiting. Communities are building up. And in the video, you can see some of the examples drawn from Maharashtra as well as from Odisha, where communities have come together to scale up and revamp, reforest of degraded forest in order to provide that natural cushion. Because natural ecosystems provide act as natural shock absorbers against these extreme events. Of late, in this whole debate of urban resilience, what has been missing is primary focus on having the granular risk landscape understanding, and how do we use that granular risk assessments and informations to build some of the natural ecosystem buffers. Because one of the major problem, and even our study, which we released just as a run-up to the COP, doing the climate vulnerability assessment of Indian districts, we found that 27 out of 35 states and union territories in India are extremely vulnerable. Now, out of which more than 80% of the population are vulnerable. So, and maximum of them are residing in urban hamlets. So what does these numbers actually provide? That 45 to 50% of our landscape are already been degraded. When I say landscape, they are mangroves, they are our tree covers, forest covers, and these landscape indicators are actually providing an information that we need to revamp our ecosystems from a landscape perspective in order to build that natural buffer against these extreme shocks. That's a low-hanging fruit. Simultaneously, while communities are coming together, what we have to do is we have to integrate some of this empirical evidence, because climate change is an evolving dynamic state. We can't have a 2015 assessment done and all our plans being relied on a 2015 assessment. We need to come up and evolve with all of those. Then where does that local capacity comes up? Again, a number from my, pardon me for my number states, but numbers are important in order to create that empirical evidence. Only many of us know that each of the districts should have a district disaster management plan, but only 30% of the Indian districts have an updated district disaster management plan. Now, what does actually we do with these numbers? This district disaster management plan should have those dynamic information about hazard, exposure, hazard, risk, and vulnerability. It's completely missing. So as a community of practitioners, what I should request, and in fact, I would urge Priya and all of us to take this thought leadership forward of integrating dynamic climate science into our public policy discourse. Vivek rightly suggested, Dr. Uma Shankar rightly suggested that it is not just about using these jargons anymore, rather using them in order to provide that empirical evidence so that a community who doesn't understand climate change but understands how much of livelihood is being lost, a community whose agriculture productivity is going to be coming down because of heat waves, a community, well, jobs are to be lost because of extreme heat waves or extreme temperature anomalies. And these are all the informations that we need to integrate. But before integrating, we need to identify this evolving risk landscape first, and then translate it into a common language. Tanmay highlighted about creating that common language of climate change. I think that's what is more important. In order to build those strategies, a lot of best practices, at the end, a lot of best practices actually exist, whether it is nature-based solutions or the community-led practices or the good governance practices. All of them needs to be scaled, implemented, and scaled up at a fashion where community should be at the forefront. With that, I would say.
Thank you, Avinash. Thank you so much. Let me now invite Vitashi from Center for Science and Environment. Vitashi.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Kaustubji. Thank you, Priya. Congratulations, Priya, for completing 40 years of empowering community. And great work, really great work. And as a neighbor, I mean, I could not say enough for what Priya has accomplished so far. So many congratulations. I would start from the point that I come from a different standpoint, that there is a lot of empowerment, and there's a lot of enablement coming from the government currently in terms of climate action, adaptation, mitigation. So as an urban planner, we've often faced that there's a lot of policy paralysis, and there is no push from the government, there is no support financially and regulatorily manner. But now I mean, in my time here at CSE, I've learned so many things about, there are so many schemes and policies that are actually enabling climate action. So India Cooling Action Plan was launched in 2019, and it talked about adoption of Eco-Niwas Samhita, like Dr. Uma Maheshwaran has also spoken about. Then Eco-Niwas Samhita is for residential buildings. Then for commercial buildings, we have ECBC 2017. So now when the cities are warming, definitely our buildings need to adapt to the growing rising temperatures. So CSE's affordable housing program and advocacy for thermal comfort is actually working in this direction and working towards implementation of ICAP. Now, a very interesting point is that Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana was released in 2015. Now, would you believe that 70% of the houses in urban areas are actually developed by the beneficiaries? So there are 4 verticals. 65 to 70% of all the houses sanctioned under the scheme are actually self-constructed. Now, when the beneficiary is constructing these houses, how should the beneficiary construct it? Definitely in a way, using good materials, using good roof coatings, using good orientation or shading devices, so that the impact of rising temperatures do not affect them. So in this case, we have a mandate, we have an enabling environment, but what is missing currently is capacity, knowledge, and awareness on what to do. So with very simple measures such as programs, I'd like to bring one example here. Telangana government has launched a cool roof program back in 2019. And with that, they have been able to get results also. They have been able to bring down temperatures by 4 to 5 degrees in the pilot that they had developed then. They have plans to cover about 5 million square meters of rooftop space in Telangana and implement their cool roof program. So this has achieved something, and this is going to achieve something. Here, the community awareness has played an instrumental role, and at least the Telangana government believes that they will be able to produce very good results with it. So one is this. Then the other part is Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana only, the Grameen version, the rural housing program, is asking beneficiaries to construct their own houses. The government is not making it for them. So now when the beneficiary is going to construct these houses themselves, all 20 million units we're talking about. So there has to be guidance for them. The government has released guidance. There's a document called PEHL. It captures various climate responsive traditional building construction techniques and materials that can help the beneficiaries to withstand the effects of changing climate as well as extreme weather events. So it's very well documented, and CSE is also working in this direction by documenting these case studies, what is being done in these areas traditionally, and how can that be improved so that the community resilience can increase towards the good direction. So we have also talked about local leadership. Formal institutions can be very good demonstrators so that whatever they've done for climate adaptation and mitigation can trickle down to the informal community as well. So RWAs, office complexes, educational campuses. CSE has a green campus program for educational institutions across India, wherein we are documenting case studies on what they have done on ground, because educational institutions, higher education institutions can be very good microcosms, and they're an ecosystem themselves. So how they deal with the changing climate and how they actually bring sustainability initiatives and climate action on ground, this can definitely spur a multiplier effect in the wider society. So all this work, these formal systems, we believe can be very good demonstrators of climate action. And speaking of local governance, ULBs, I'd be happy to share that ULBs are actually working towards climate action in very different ways. So the National Clean Air Program, it asks ULBs to plan their action in several sectors. So solid waste management, C&D waste management is one of its aspects. But what it has done is ULBs have received a lot of funding under the 15th Finance Commission recommendations, and now they have to implement something. So what they're doing is the solid waste management rules they talk about development of waste management plans, and that has to be submitted by the beneficiary. So, and similarly, C&D waste rules have come up. And building permissions, one has to develop a construction management plan and a construction waste management plan and submit it to the ULB. Only then the building will get permitted. So all these mandates have actually given some impetus for the community to act towards it. If you go to Gurugram and Noida and Ghaziabad, the group housing societies and the RWAs are developing their own bylaws so that they can do good stormwater management at their end, and they can do waste management, and they can also do some retrofitting to increase the green cover in their societies. So, and I would like to mention that two important addendums have come. So Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs has recently released guidance on climate action, especially cooling action, and within which they are promoting water sensitive urban design and planning, increasing tree cover, then retrofitting techniques for building envelope, using good materials to insulate roofs, using shading devices so that there is less heat ingress in the houses to withstand the rising temperatures. Then shading the walkway, shading the pedestrian ways, and vertical greens, and many such things.
So thank you,
now,
Mitashi.
yes.
And my apology to stop you there. But thank you for sharing those information and very useful.
Absolutely.
I see Zinat has raised her hand. Zinat, and then Shubhagato, if I may invite Shubhagato.
Thank you, Kostav, and thank you for this invitation. And of course, congratulations again for the 40th year. Again, repeating everybody else, but from my heart, the work that you all are doing has been inspirational since the time I have joined the sector, like 30 years back. So, it's been something that's certainly that one is learning from all the time. But, if from the questions that you asked and all the speakers, all the people who sort of shared their insights so far, one issue, and I think it's an experience, but also has raised many issues of this whole aspect of citizen and community engagement, and also facilitating the kind of solutions for whether these are construction solutions or like was just being mentioned, or wastewater management solutions, etc. How do these two things sort of match? One experience that I would like to bring in is from our work in the rural housing space. Over, I think, 2002 to 2011, a very interesting civil society facilitated network, which came under the banner of Basin South Asia, came together. And in India, our focus really, and we were about 22 to 23 network partners, some grassroots, some technical institutions, some very much think tank kind of institutions. We came together with an objective that we would look at that time, the Indira Awas Yojana, and see what is the improvement. And we just heard about Pahel. Pahel is in fact has come up after that whole long journey, and lots of things have happened in that process. And that community of practice, in that sense, that came together then was not only a sharing space. It was not just a knowledge sharing space. It was actually very actively working network, which was in their grounds generating, demonstrating and doing experiments, demonstrating new knowledge, if you may say so, collecting that evidence, sharing that evidence, lobbying for that evidence, and in different ways. So there were members of that community that are still part of task forces of the government, for example, members who would be task forces of special research teams of NABARD and Housing Finance, or DIS, for example. And so there was a whole series of work that was being done, including things like yatras to engage with local panchayats, to figure out what really is something that rural housing program should initiate. And over the years, it made what kind of skills are required and how should those skills be delivered, what kind of technologies are required, and over the years, gently pushing at the system, engaging with the system. So in my view, it was quite successful. I mean, there are still members of that community. We all come together when there's required. There's a group right now within HAF working on assessment, for example, of the current PMAY rural. Lots of members of that large community have been part of building the Pahel documents, for example, for the government. But one thing that always comes to our mind is that this platform was a civil society initiative. It was driven by civil society. It was talking to the government and trying very hard to have the government be part of their platform. The other side was not really that active, if you may say so. I mean, they were receiving, they were learning, and they were absorbing, but there are no spaces, at least adequately, where the different stakeholders come on the same level playing field. I don't know if I'm articulating myself right, but we are talking power, imbalance of power. So there might be expertise, but there is always the government that is the doer. The community as the doer is not recognized very often by the government. So that connection, I think, is something that we saw, which needs to be balanced. I suppose that's the way it is in all situations, government, where you have governments and communities. So that was an interesting experience.
Sorry, Zinat, I have to stop you there. We can come back, if we have some more time. But thank you for bringing that power equation issue and the need for bringing recognition and acknowledgement of communities' knowledge and ability to solve their own problem. That's critical. Thank you, Zinat. Shubhagato.
Yeah, thank you, Kaustav. To start off with, congratulations to Professor Tandon and for not only having Priya giving us such wonderful colleagues and having so much more knowledge and so much more interesting things to do and to debate about for all this while. I will, given the paucity of time, I will go into maybe just 3 issues that I've kind of flagged more as questions, further questions. One is to look at what does urbanization look like in the future, an understanding of that itself, and Kaustav mentioned it in between about smaller towns, large dense villages adopting older ideas of what urbanization entails. And so how do we take proactive action along the value chain of urbanization, given that we are urbanizing at a particular ratio, there is lots more to go. And that is one of the global concerns for sure. Secondly, the issue around, all the planning principles mentioned, and I'm delighted to be part of this conversation, to hear from so many people about their work and also their idea of pursuing climate in urban. The issue remains that much of these urban planning principles being discussed today too are all well established, well understood planning principles that we've all been working towards for some time. So the change means what, how, and how would climate change debate kind of accelerate some of these ideas which haven't seen really the light of the day in competition with the degradation of that old processes are bringing about. So I think a lot of attention needs to be paid to that issue. And just as an example, I'll leave you with one program that we are intimately involved with, the Jaga mission in Orissa, which talks to Kaustav's initial articulation of the discussion today, and it hits the climate dialogue because it does look at climate justice from a local government in-country perspective, not only intergenerational, as it's famously come to be understood, but how does communities that are looking forward to development in the future are going to face all of these kind of policies, institutional changes, all the pressures that go with it, and is it going to constrain their growth path? Given that the Jaga mission is a very good example where land rights are being given over to slum dwellers, and in that process, a slum upgrading program has been initiated. The slum upgrading program further benefited from something called the Urban Wage Employment Program, where livelihoods in the wake of COVID were being lost. So local self-help groups and what I call slum dwellers associations in Orissa were engaged on a wage employment basis to upgrade their own slums, building what is being conceptualized and often referred to here, both in the data sense, but also local leadership and local capacity, what is being called in Orissa the 4th tier of government. and engaging them in a process whereby the poor themselves are building their own cities. So it covers both the social aspects of and governance aspects of integrating marginalized communities into cities. It talks about it kind of tick marks on the employment constraints that especially hit us during COVID, and the resilience issues around it. And finally, the physical resilience too, because much of the infrastructure being built has LED lighting, it has pavered streets, it has water at the doorstep, reducing a number of the constraints that these local communities have. So Kaustubh, I'll leave it there as an example.
Thank you, Shubhagata. May I invite Tanya, your reflection?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, first of all, I want to join the long row of people congratulating Priya for your birthday, so to speak. And thanks for inviting me. And also, again, cordial thanks for the very fruitful cooperation that we had within the framework of the BRIUCOM project that already you mentioned, and which I do have the honor to coordinate from here in Austria. And I think there were so many very crucial points that were brought up here, and I just, as we are nearing completion, I would just kind of like to try to form a synthesis from my side, if you allow me to. And I mean, there are 2 points that I would have liked to bring in from this, again, from my point of view, which is of course different probably to yours for mere geographical reasons. So of course, for me, what is extremely important and interesting is this connection that we are building here between Europe and India. And it's, I find it fascinating to see how the same questions and same requirements in terms of climate change and the problems that it poses finds different answers, and nevertheless we are still able to learn across these divides of distance, geographical distance, different climate, and different societies. Nevertheless, I think there is a lot that can be learned. Not least, I think the point of participation was mentioned very prominently again and again, participation of communities. And before coming into this discussion here today, actually, I was wondering also about the point of democracy that kind of underlies to a certain extent the notion of participation. And just pointing to the fact, for instance, that here in Austria, we do have districts that have so many migrants who do not have citizenship, and therefore you might have more than half the population not being eligible for any kind of democratic rights. So I think that poses a question for how do you go about finding solutions that do respond to the needs of all who are living in a specific place. That said, as I said, I would like to pick up a few points that have been highlighted here, which resonated a lot with me. So there was the issue of lifestyle very prominently highlighted, and I think there are big challenges for all of us to adapt our lifestyles towards what is needed in order to be able to halt climate change. That certainly, and that was also mentioned, needs a critical mass of people willing and able to change or adapt lifestyles. And that, as a next step, demands political will that is also turned into administrative will. Again, something that came up very prominently here. I think that is something that we also saw within the framework of our projects and the case studies that were made here. And it mostly what we also saw is the need to make science understandable and accessible for policy action to be taken. So there was this notion of finding a common language, and that I think is really a big task to engage with, because as I see it now, both here in Europe, as well as I can judge it from my viewpoint in India, I think there is this need to further make things understandable on the ground for both citizens as well as the policy makers and the decision makers. And then last but not least, I think, and that I take for me as a takeaway from this discussion today is this urgency of capacity building. And as coming from a university and representing a network of universities that was trying to engage in capacity building targeted at resilience, I see it as a task and a commitment for the future to try and engage in further capacity building activities, not only, but of course also on the academic level and also on other levels. So I just want to say that I'm very much interested in working together further with as many of you as possible in trying to bring this capacity building forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you everyone for wonderful contribution in this discussion. Let me invite Ms. Sheila Patel. Sheila-ji, what are your pickups from these takeaways from this discussion?
So first of all, I want to say that it's been wonderful listening to this amazing range of perspectives that all seem to tie up with each other, but the humongous problem of scaling amazing innovations, of dealing with governance structures and making top-down and bottom-up institutional arrangements meet up with each other, demonstrate to us the need for all of us to join hands and to make a contribution of whatever we have been doing or that we aspire to do in creating new partnerships, alliances that bring all this knowledge together to make cities work for everybody. In whatever I have experienced in the climate space for the last 3 years that I have engaged in it, I see that the issue of equity, social justice, informality, especially within cities, still remain a unexplored global discussion other than the lip service to be given to vulnerable communities. And so creating a robust framework that uses information gathering, community aggregation, negotiation and dialogues between formal and informal institutions, science and technology providers, and amazing think tanks and consulting firms and these ingredients. And here I want to speak as a person on Priya's board that I think Priya's role in all these things. I believe that is very important in this discussion. So knowledge that comes from different elements for different reasons, for aggregating challenges, finding solutions, monitoring change, all have potential for providing instruments and tools to different voiceless constituencies so that they can participate in this change, and that whatever they do, as some of you have already said, become shining examples, because most poor communities have to see something happening to believe that it works for them. They're tired of being told. Both Rajesh, hope that this discussion is not an end in itself, but gives all of us who are part of different levels of Priya, agendas in which we will produce our work in this spectrum of urban governance and making change work for vulnerable communities, a very tangible process that we take forward. So back to you for how nicely this worked.
Thank you, Sheilaji. Rajesh Bhai.
Well, first of all, thank you all for joining this conversation. I have taken notes, but I have also been informed about so many different ways in which everybody is engaged, including national and provincial governments, examples, and the story from Maharashtra was very inspiring, in fact. I want to return to this question that Subhagato was posing towards the end about Jaga as a model and significance of making community-driven planning as a fulcrum for any kind of resilience. I believe that cities cannot be resilient without all communities being resilient. And when I speak of all communities, I'm reminded of what Aditya said in the beginning, that a substantial part of urban communities or cities comprises of informal, less resourced, vulnerable, precarious urban communities. And particularly in India, this is a nature of urbanization and is unlikely to change irrespective of the pandemic showing migration from rural to urban and back to rural. So the nature of the economy is such that informality in cities is cohabiting with formality, but the knowledge production function remains formal and does not tap the informal. And that's why these examples that many of you shared are so important. Putting the onus at the city level also entails providing them with both macro but also granular data. And I think this is where community-driven data production, linking their lived experience to the rationale and the logic of climate impact, I think is an important conversation. And unless we have that conversation, it will not change behavior at the community level. And certainly it will not change behavior at the level of the local governments. The central players in local government, in my view, which continue to be ignored in our national level as well as many provinces, are the elected councillors and mayors. The amount of investment that has gone in Panchayati Raj elected members over the last 30 years, it is now going to be 30 years since 73rd, 74th Amendment was made. Not even 2% of that has gone into the working with the councillors. And when it comes to learning by the elected representatives, learning has to be in situ. We used to talk about capacity building in situ, learning by doing on the ground, but pandemic has reinforced this. But this business of producing PPT-based, universal training programs for elected councillors from cities as diverse as Jhunjhunu to Sambalpur is a travesty of capacity building. So if we want them to take leadership, which they ought to, because it is their city, their ward, then we have to find a way to have a conversation with them, which starts from where they are in their dialect and highlights the link between development of the city and resilience that needs to be built. They are smart people. They are not stupid. It's just that those of us who have expertise have not mediated this relationship adequately. The final point that I am taking away is what Zeenath was saying. And Zeenath made a very important point that in respect of our work on participation of the communities, finding local solutions. Civil society platforms have historically been very strong in India. When it comes to our work in urbanized areas, inclusive urbanization, resilient urbanization, civil society platforms have been non-existent. I am meeting so many of you in this conversation by virtue of this opportunity. Can we not create a mechanism which brings think tanks, experts, community voices, local civil society groups, in order to have a conversation about what is working, what is not working, how can this be made to work, what grand policy statements and guidelines of the central government are reaching, not reaching, need adaptation, need translation. So this is perhaps an area where we could find a way to come together if we move forward in the coming period with our concern. 2 days ago, Francis Piketty released the report on Inequality Lab, and his comments about India becoming the most unequal society are daunting. 50% of India's bottom half population contributes to less than 12% of national income, and top 10% takes away nearly 60%. This growing inequality is most visible in every city of this country. And unless we find a way to put this as center stage of our resilience work, mere changes in policies of transportation or water or energy will not make a difference. And how do we therefore anchor the work on resilient cities and resilient communities within a larger framework of equity and justice, which Sheila was saying? So thank you, colleagues. I've become very informed about the potential for our working together as we move ahead into 2022. And thank you for your warm wishes and acknowledgement of Priya's 40 years. We continue to be working together with you in the next 20, if not next 40. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rajesh Bhai. And thank you to all of you who stayed together up until now. Some of you had to go for other work, so we understand that. But thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. And we should be able to share with a reflection report from this conversation, and video recording will also be available on Priya website, so that in case you have missed some part of it, you'll still be able to access and use it for your own work. And thank you for all the generous sharing. Thank you. Have a good evening.